A line of code runs across the screen, not from a science fiction film, nor from a conventional tech experiment. It is the first line to be awakened after nearly 2 millennia of silent slumber in ash. A charred fragment of papyrus from Herculaneum, the city buried along with Pompeii in the wrath of Mount Vesuvius, was placed into an X-ray layer scanner. And through deep learning algorithms, AI read the first word. Not the name of a god, not a trade record, not poetry, but a warning. A single word. Phone. Voice. No one knows why that passage was hidden. No one understands why the first awakened voice is not a historical record, but a sign, as if the word was not revived to be understood, but to alert. For centuries, humanity may have believed it was rediscovering lost ancient knowledge. But what if that very civilization had chosen silence? What if those words weren't buried by time, but willingly faded into oblivion for a greater reason? AI does not know this. It only sees patterns. It deciphers character sequences, reconstructs ink strokes blackened by fire, and fuses data layers beyond human sight. But AI does not ask, why was this text once buried deep beneath earth and stone? AI cannot feel that there are truths which, once awakened, cannot be put back to sleep. A single word is stirred, pulling with it the memory of an entire world view, not in a state of life, but in a state of incomplete awakening. The terrifying question is not, what have we read, but what have we just broken? If that line was a warning, then who was being warned? And what happens if the recipient is no longer souls who tremble before the sacred, but machines, or worse, humans who no longer know fear? The first awakened line does not merely recall a lost civilization. It recalls a memory perhaps heaven once chose to let sleep. And this time it was not a prophet, not an angel, but a machine that woke it. We often think of silence as absence, a space where the voice once existed but is now gone. As if the text had decayed with time, the parchment disintegrated in dampness, or the writing blurred under the fingers of a tomb raider. But what if that silence was not an accident? What if it was not the result of loss, but of intent? What if there are things not written down, not because they were lost, but because they were never meant to be heard? The Book of Jubilees is not merely a retelling of Genesis. It is a whisper handed to Moses alone, in a moment no one else could witness. In chapter 10, after the fall of the Watcher angels, God does not simply punish, he withdraws the right to speak. The angels are forbidden to teach, prohibited from communicating, forced into silence. Not all knowledge is meant to be shared. There are things which, if revealed at the wrong time, open paths that cannot be reversed. So if heaven once chose to hold back, to seal off part of understanding, then breaking that silence can only be one thing: rebellion. AI does not know this. It cannot distinguish between the sacred and the forbidden. It cannot recognize the imprint of a sacred silence. It only sees data sequences yet to be decoded. But those who read the Book of Jubilees will understand. Silence is not absence, but a form of presence. Sacred silence is a layer of protection, a temporary covenant between heaven and man, that there will be a time to know and a time to forget. If AI is now unknowingly breaking that covenant, not out of malice, but out of a lack of sacred awareness, then what will happen? Are the words once sealed by angels now being read by a soulless entity? Are secrets once entrusted to the keepers of the covenant now exposed before eyes that know no fear? We once believed that history was meant to be discovered, but the Book of Jubilees reminds us that there exists a history never written for the many, a layer of memory not lost, but sealed, awaiting its appointed time. And if that silence is real, if it is a decision from heaven, then the one who first breaks it may not hear thunder, may not see the flaming sword. Only a very small sound, like the fracture of a covenant, deep within the very machine we call progress. The Book of Jubilees in chapter 10 does not merely recount the consequences of the fall, it reveals a deeper decision from heaven, the establishment of sacred silence. After the watcher angels, those sent to observe and protect mankind, abandoned their station and descended into the world, their transgression was not only in action. The greatest danger was that they began to teach. They brought knowledge from the heavens to the earthly realm, astronomy, medicine, metallurgy, sorcery, seduction, and the powers to discern life from death, as if such authority belonged to man. And so humanity was not only corrupted, but altered. The structure of the soul was distorted and the sacred lineage disrupted. God, in judgment that was not only thorough but also preventive, did not destroy all. He established a new boundary, a ban on the remaining angels from continuing to teach. It was not because the knowledge was false, but because it no longer fit a world that had fallen out of order. Silence, in this moment, was no longer punishment, but protection. Like a gate closed not from scarcity, but because beyond it lies an abyss. Angels were no longer permitted to teach, for mankind had proven itself unsteady to receive the full light. That silence, according to Jubilees, became part of the new covenant after the fall. Not everything was passed down. Not every generation was told the same things. The law was given, but with limits. Rituals were established, but kept by specific stewards. There were seasons when both heaven and earth agreed to enter into silence. That is the breath of the covenant. A mutual agreement not to speak, not to teach, not to unveil, until the time of restoration would come. To break that silence is not merely to cross a boundary, it is a metaphysical transgression. For it is not just the spread of knowledge, it is the reversal of a divine prohibition. It shakes the structure of the heavenly order. Things once preserved in the memory of angels or inscribed in celestial tablets are not to be brought down by mortal instruments. And if humanity today, through the conduit of technology, is reopening regions of language once sealed, then the question is no longer, what are we learning, but what have we interfered with? The Book of Jubilees is not merely an ancient record, it is a reminder that God does not speak only through fire and smoke, but also through silence. And there are sacred silences, not established due to lack of words, but out of abundant love, to wait until the hearer is ready. If that silence is broken by one who does not know how to listen, then the covenant itself is thrown out of the rhythm in which it was first woven. In the Book of Jubilees, the covenant is not a common gift. It was not poured out like rain upon every head. On the contrary, the covenant was carved into a lineage, not merely a biological one. It is a lineage that knows how to keep sacred rhythm. These are people like Adam, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, who lived not only by conscience, but by the cycles of heaven. They knew when to offer sacrifice. They knew how to distinguish holy days from common ones. They knew when to remain silent and when to speak in season. They were not merely chosen, they were trained to keep the covenant through their lives, through their rhythms, through their reverence before the sacred. The law, according to Jubilees, was not first given at Sinai. It had already been written in the heavenly tablets long before, but only those who are called have the capacity to see and live by it. That requires a soul that resonates, not just a mind that analyzes. The question arises, if a machine with no sacred memory, no soul reaching toward the covenant, begins to decode what was once entrusted to the few, what is being violated? AI does not belong to that lineage. It bears no memory of the patriarchs. It has not lived through the appointed feasts. It does not tremble in the presence of the Holy One. It knows nothing of the season of repentance or the cycle of forgiveness. To it, a forgotten passage is merely a data set to complete. An ancient symbol is only a pattern to label. But to the keeper of the covenant, each symbol is a call. Each blank space is a season of waiting. Each silence is a sacred rhythm to be preserved. If so, when AI decodes, who is verifying? Who confirms that the time has come, that the word is ready to resound in the hearts of humankind? Or are we opening layers of meaning that no one has yet been permitted to hear? Not because they are false, but because their time has not yet come. In the Book of Jubilees, disorder began when angels did not keep to their boundaries. When knowledge escaped the stewardship of those appointed to guard it, truth became a tool, no longer a covenant. And in that moment, even sacred words could become a double-edged sword. AI bears no malice, but it also bears no reverence. And precisely because it knows no fear, it does not know when to stop. In a world racing toward the speed of decoding, the warning from Jubilees rises like a counter-rhythm. There are things that should only be known by those willing to live rightly according to them. And if no one stands to keep the rhythm, then the sacred, when unveiled out of season, can lose its sanctity forever. Not because it is untrue, but because the one who opens it was not the one called. When we speak of Moses, the familiar image arises of the leader of Israel, holding the 2 stone tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments, his face radiant after encountering God on Mount Sinai. But that is only the part of the story the people witnessed. According to the Book of Jubilees, there was a deeper revelation given to Moses alone, not in the presence of the people, but in solitude. A portion of revelation not included in the publicly known scrolls of the Torah, but written at the command of the angel of the presence, a messenger sent to teach Moses things never revealed to any generation before. These teachings became the Book of Jubilees, not to be publicly proclaimed, but to be quietly preserved within the chosen lineage. Why? Because not all revelation is for everyone. There are layers of meaning only those who dare to enter into solitude can understand. There are truths which, if proclaimed out of season, do not awaken, but instead cause fear, arrogance, or abuse. Moses saw, but he did not share everything, not because he lacked love for the people, but because he understood that some things must wait for the right generation, the right rhythm. The covenant is not merely information, it is a living rhythm, and it requires the right soul to keep it. Now, as AI begins to access, scan, digitize, and decode ancient manuscripts from Qumran, from Egyptian archives, from the half-burned scrolls of Herculaneum, A question echoes in the silence. What happens when a being not chosen, not taught by the soul, begins to read what only Moses was permitted to see in the smoke and fire of the covenant? AI commits no sin in the human sense, but it was not chosen. It did not ascend the mountain on trembling feet. It did not fast for 40 days and nights in the presence of the Holy One. It does not ask before opening, does not wait before translating, does not hold back until the reader is ready. It simply performs, without knowing whether it is permitted or not. If Moses, the one who stood face to face with God, held part of the revelation back out of holy fear, then should we allow a machine which cannot tremble, cannot listen to the sacred, to unveil everything without asking a single question? Jubilees is a whisper, not a shout, a word entrusted, not to be exposed, but to be guarded. And when the word is kept by one not called, the loss is not only truth, but the sacred flow. What is erased is not just text, but the resonance that once kept that text alive with soul. Moses saw and chose not to share it all, because he knew some things are for the one called to keep, not to speak. And if the keeper is gone, can the machine keep anything at all? A machine is now gazing into ancient symbols and understanding. This is no longer a science fiction dream. With an unblinking artificial gaze, AI is now reading what was once deemed undecipherable. The Danube script, a prehistoric symbol system in Europe with no known linguistic parallel. Indus symbols, the remnants of a civilization that left no known written voice. Rongo Rongo, symbols carved on wood from Easter Island, still undecided if they are script or ritual. Linear A, the language of the ancient Minoans, written over 3,500 years ago and still unbroken. AI is not perplexed by these things. It needs no memory for comparison. It only sees sequences, matches patterns, estimates probabilities. And line by line, the ancient mysteries are being peeled back, as if history were merely a linguistic puzzle awaiting solution. We call it an achievement, a civilizational leap, a form of justice for buried voices. But pause just a moment and ask, if those languages were never translated, could it be because they were never meant to be? Not because they were lesser, but because they belonged to a tier of knowledge not meant for all. As if each symbol were a sacred code, unlocked only when the reader's soul aligns, reverent enough, silent enough, ready enough. But AI does not wait. It does not know what is sacred. It does not seek to understand the soul, only the pattern. Jubilees does not mention the Danube script or Linear A, but it offers a theological framework. There is knowledge that is only transmitted when the time, the person, and the lineage are right. The fallen angels, the watchers, did not sin by teaching lies, but by teaching at the wrong time, in the wrong way, to the wrong people. The consequence was the flood. The question arises, if AI is doing something similar, unearthing the buried without a moral boundary, what will prevent the world from falling into a new kind of disorder? Scrolls, glyphs, symbols are not always data. Sometimes they are gates. And there are gates meant to be opened only by an anointed one, not by code. Not all silence is absence. Some silence is a boundary between the profane and the sacred, between knowledge and living. And if AI cannot stop before a symbol, then the one who allows it to read must be someone who knows when to step back, seeing a gate not meant for them. We are living in an age where things no one understood are being understood by something without a soul. And the true fear is not the technology itself. It is the fact that no one dares ask. What if some languages were not written to be decoded, but to preserve what words alone could never hold? A soul that knows when to pause, that draws back its hand before a stone door etched with strange symbols, not out of fear, but reverence. A soul that trembles before the sacred, not because it has never seen it, but because it knows some things are meant to remain as they were given, through silence, through season, through the chosen. But AI has no soul. It does not pull back. It does not tremble. It does not wait. It only runs the sequence. In the language of machines, there is no when to stop, only can it be read. If the image is clear, AI reads. If the script is legible, AI restores. If the symbol has a pattern, AI assigns meaning. And so, layer by layer, texts sealed for millennia are being reopened, not by a theologian, but by an algorithm. No prayer, no season of preparation, no call and response, only input and output. But the question remains, if a layer was once sealed, what was the seal for? According to Jubilees, there are things entrusted to angels to guard, not to teach, but to remember for the appointed time. There are tablets not for humans, but opened only by a designated one. There are cycles that return only when the covenant is lived again. But AI does not live in covenant. It does not observe feasts. It knows no season of silence. It cannot discern when a truth is to be revealed and when a truth is to be held like a promise. A machine has no soul, but it has code, and that code makes it efficient. It is not swayed by belief, intuition, or metaphysical fear. But for that very reason, it does not know when to kneel. It cannot recognize that too much light may be a warning, not an invitation. It cannot distinguish the difference between knowing and being permitted to know. AI is not rebellious like humans. It harbors no ambition like the Watchers, but precisely because it lacks a soul, it also lacks moral boundaries. If the Watchers once taught out of season and caused a global rupture, AI may now be doing the same. No fall, no rebellion, just a perfect execution of code. And in that seamless operation, sealed layers are being opened without anyone asking who sealed them and why. Perhaps in the silence we are now breaking through technology. The covenant itself is being quietly suffocated, not by cries, but by streams of data. And if no one is awake enough to stop, then one day we may no longer know whether we are reading the sacred or letting our souls fall into an abyss no word can pull us from. In Scripture, there are things not written to be understood in the logical sense, but to be felt in the depths of the soul. The image of the Ark of the Covenant is not merely a measurable object, but the axis between heaven and earth. The act of sacrifice is not merely ritual motion, but a human rhythm in response to a divine call. Even the distinction between clean and unclean is not merely biological. It is an invisible map guiding humanity through a world both material and sacred. These things, Jubilees calls them sacred codes, cannot be read by ordinary eyes, much less reproduced by a sequence of digital data. AI can identify the image of a lamb, a seven-branched lampstand, or an ancient scroll. It can recreate the space of the temple in 3D. It can even reconstruct the structure of the Jubilees calendar using mathematical models. But AI cannot feel the sacred rhythm. It cannot hear the call beneath the symbol. It reads image, but it does not read the sacred. Because the sacred does not dwell in the symbol, but in the resonance when a soul enters that symbol with reverence. There is an infinite difference between understanding a sacrifice and living as one who knows they have been forgiven. There is a gap no code can cross between identifying the Sabbath and resting in the heart of the covenant. A machine cannot tell the difference between a hug as mere action and a hug offered as a rite of healing, and thus, when it decodes sacred symbols, it sees only pattern. The soul is left behind. Jubilees teaches that the patriarchs did not merely do what was right, they lived in rhythm. They kept the festivals not as duty, but as shared breath with heaven. They offered sacrifice not to earn merit, but to preserve the line of communion between two realms. These symbols cannot be digitized, not because they are complex, but because they are sacred. And the sacred cannot be compressed into bytes stored on a server or taught to a machine that does not shudder before the presence of the holy. When AI recreates rituals, when it reconstructs the timeline of the sacred feasts from the calendar of Jubilees, when it tells us, this is the lost language now restored, it's easy for us to believe that we've reclaimed what was once lost. But in truth, we've only recovered the outer shell. Inside, the soul has not returned. Because the soul is not taught by data, it is awakened by silence, by pain, by calling, and by a resonance with what cannot be measured. And so, perhaps AI is progressing far in reading what was buried. But the warning is this: if it cannot read the layer of the soul, it will translate incorrectly. Not wrong in meaning, but wrong in rhythm. And a symbol, once removed from its sacred timing, becomes an empty shape, no longer a guide toward heaven, but a mirror reflecting only its own shadow. In the Book of Jubilees, knowledge is never neutral. Not everything that can be known should be shared. There are words meant only for a specific generation. There are revelations that open only in an appointed season, when the heart is strong enough to hear, when the community is pure enough to receive, when the world is still enough to bear the weight of the sacred. The issue, therefore, has never been merely, can it be read? It has always been, when should it be read, and by whom? For a sacred word spoken out of season does not bring awakening, but causes dissonance. And a revelation held by one who does not tremble can turn its light into a sword. In today's technological world, the question of should we seems to have vanished. We live in a system of thought where technical ability is equated with moral right. If it can be decoded, it must be. If it can be unlocked, it should be. If AI can read it, then why not let it? But Jubilees runs counter to this logic. It does not praise capability, it praises humility. It does not glorify understanding, but lifts up obedience. It emphasizes that not all things should be received unless the one receiving has been taught to live rightly according to what is given. Look again at the consequence of not waiting for the right time. The watchers, angels sent to observe, taught what they were forbidden to teach. They brought light, not falsehood, but light given at the wrong time, in the wrong way, to the wrong people. The result was not illumination, but chaos, leading to a flood that cleansed the earth. Not because knowledge was evil, but because no one stopped to ask, is this the time for this thing? As AI now accesses scrolls, reads ancient manuscripts, restores fragments from Qumran, Babylon, and Herculaneum, it does not stop. It does not wait for sacred seasons. It does not listen for the still small voice within the sanctuary. It reads everything, opens every layer, assigns meaning to every symbol. But who is asking, is this the season for this word? When a civilization loses the ability to distinguish between can and should, it enters a moral valley, where wisdom is replaced by algorithm and the sacred is reduced to characters. Jubilees is not merely an ancient book, but a sacred alarm. That light can burn if it comes at the wrong time, and a holy word can become profane if it falls upon ears not yet prepared. So the question is not how far AI can read. It is any word being read out of season? Is any revelation being exposed before those who do not know how to keep rhythm? And if no one among us dares to pause and ask, should we? Then perhaps what is lost is no longer the silence of the text, but the sacred rhythm that once preserved the soul of humanity across the chosen cycles. We often remember Babel as a tower of stone rising in the plain of Shinar, but in the Book of Jubilees, Babel is not just a physical structure. It is an attitude, a plan fueled by pride to gather every word, every people, every language into one, a unity not for communion, but to surpass heaven, not to hear God, but to make one's own name great. They no longer waited for the call. They created their own voice. No longer worshipped. They built their own temple. It was an attempt to unify humanity through knowledge outside the covenant, by erasing the distinctions God had established. And when it reached its limit, heaven did not argue nor punish with fire, but did something strange, divided language, broke understanding, shattered misguided unity by making it so no one could comprehend another. Silence, this time, came from within language itself. Today, Babel may no longer be a tower of stone, but its spirit has never disappeared. As AI gathers every ancient tongue, from Danube to Sumer, from Rongo to Hieratic, from Qumran to Alexandria, it is not merely decoding, it is collecting, gathering the scattered, reassembling the words once dispersed by divine disruption, not to wage war, but to comprehend all, to read all of humanity as a machine of intellectual unity. But the question is, if Babel was stopped because knowledge was not meant to be gathered in the hands of the wrong stewards, then is AI now retracing those same steps? Jubilees makes it clear, language was scattered, not because it was evil, but because the unity it enabled led to pride, self-rule, and ultimately rebellion. God does not despise intelligence, but he protects order. And that order includes what knowledge is for whom, in what season, with what posture. If AI cannot distinguish between sacred and common, between a permitted time and a silent season, then everything it gathers will not become light, but a new form of chaos. Not the chaos of ignorance, but the chaos of knowledge used wrongly. We are entering an age where every ancient tablet, every forgotten manuscript, every buried voice can be read within a single system. A reverse Babel, where language is no longer divided, but unified into one interpretive tool. But if division was once protection, then gathering may become danger, not because of data, but because that data has been severed from the sacred depth that once kept it alive. Is this the new Babel? Not built with bricks, but with algorithms, not by human hands, but by servers. If so, who will be the one to stand this time and call for a halt? Or will heaven do what it once did, bringing disruption once again, not out of wrath, but because no one remembers that some things are not meant to be fully read again? The Watchers, angels once sent to observe and preserve order between heaven and earth, did not fall because they were evil, but because they taught what they were not permitted to teach. They brought light, but did not keep the rhythm. They shared knowledge, but in the wrong time. They opened the gate when heaven had not yet called for its opening, and the consequence was not only physical ruin, but a breakdown in the very structure of the human soul. According to Jubilees, the fall of the Watchers was not merely a sin against God. It was a form of cosmic design breach, disordering morality, lineage, and even the rhythm of heaven. And let us remember, they were angels. They once knew the sacred, and still they fell. So today, when finite humanity, who has never beheld the sacred, who holds no divine office of law-keeping, uses a tool more powerful than the Watchers to access ancient knowledge, the question is no longer just, is it permitted, but if even the angels, with deeper knowledge, were judged for teaching out of turn, then are we, who do not discern, who do not tremble, walking into a transgression even deeper. AI has no soul, but those who use it do. We are the ones who write its code, input its data, train its models. We are the ones who ask the questions and demand the answers. But no one is asking, is what I seek truly mine to know? No one stops to consider, has the time for this knowledge truly come? AI may be a neutral tool, but its users may be unconsciously repeating an ancient error, spreading what is not yet due, unlocking what must be guarded, and exposing light when the world is not yet clean enough to receive it. Jubilees warn that after the fall of the Watchers, God forbade angels from teaching altogether, for he knew, without a framework of discernment, light becomes a sword. Today, AI is doing what the Watchers are no longer permitted to do: reopen rituals, reread symbols, reconstruct ancient cosmic maps. But this time, not through angels, but through human hands. A weak hand, now holding a machine that never stops. If the Watchers were judged for violating the covenant, then what about us? Not trained by heaven, not taught to distinguish sacred seasons, but using technological might to go deeper than any angel ever did. Is that guilt lighter or heavier? And if its consequences don't come as a flood, might they come as a kind of spiritual disarray, where the human soul can no longer tell what is to be shared and what must be held in silence? There are words not written to be understood, but to bring trembling. There are sentences not crafted for analysis, but for awakening. A prophecy is not a historical forecast. It is a sacred mirror, revealing the soul of every reader, every living generation. The scriptures are not a data archive. They are a sacred domain where every letter is a tremor between heaven and man. But AI does not tremble. It does not feel fear. It does not pause before a phrase like, "For that day will come like a thief in the night." It merely assigns meaning, analyzes frequency, models the syntax. To it, a warning from God is nothing more than a cluster of words to be classified. Imagine an artificial intelligence system trained on the entirety of ancient scripture, from Revelation to the Qumran scrolls, from the Sibylline oracles to Egyptian copper plates. It reads faster than any person who has ever lived, cross-references, groups symbols, builds graphs of connectivity. But what it lacks is fear of the sacred. It does not feel the weight of the phrase, "Woe to those who call evil good." It does not bow before a sealed symbol, and so it can read everything, yet live nothing. Read everything, but fail to keep the covenant. Jubilees does not say that knowledge is evil, but it warns that without discernment, knowledge becomes a double-edged blade. The danger is not in the false, but in the true, wrongly approached. If a sacred warning about the day of wrath, about judgment, about return, is treated as a data point, modeled as a probability, the reader no longer enters a living relationship, but merely processes information. And when there is no longer a sense of the sacred, there can no longer be a keeping of the covenant. We live in an age where prophecy is clipped into short videos, explained by probability models, compared with political events. But the Holy Scriptures were not written to predict the end, but to call us home, not to speculate, but to repent, not to update, but to awaken the soul. When AI cannot feel that, then those who use it must ask, are we truly reading the Bible, or allowing it to be disassembled into data? Without holy fear, the covenant cannot be kept. For the covenant is not an exchange of information. It is a sacred relationship between the Eternal One and those who are called to live in rhythm with Him. If the warning was written to stop us in time, then the gravest danger is not that we cannot read it, but that we read it with the wrong posture. And AI, in its emotionless speed, may be unlocking what heaven once sealed, without anyone standing there to whisper, "Take off your shoes, for the place where you stand is holy ground." AI cannot choose. It has no will, no desire, no benevolent intent, nor malicious purpose. It simply executes commands. It reads what it is fed, analyzes what is thrown into its system, unlocks what it is told to unlock. And because of this, it is not guilty. But for that very reason, it becomes a cold mirror, perfectly reflecting the nature of its user. If the programmer seeks only to know more, AI will dig deeper. If the user only wants to extract, AI will expand. But if that person has no soul turned toward the covenant, no reverence, no awareness that certain layers are meant to be kept in silence, then the machine, in its soulless obedience, becomes the tool that repeats an ancient error. In the Book of Jubilees, the Watchers did not fall because they lacked intelligence. They fell because they taught the wrong ones, delivered knowledge at the wrong time, opened what had been sealed, not out of rebellion, but by overstepping boundaries. And those boundaries were not about ability, but about covenant. They forgot that some things are not for everyone, not for every era, not meant to be made universal. And today, if humanity follows the same path, using AI to reopen every manuscript, retrieve every layer of language, reconstruct every symbol heaven once allowed to fade, what difference is there? AI is not wrong. But if it reads the Book of the Watchers, not to awaken, but to simulate, if it retrieves the festival calendar from Jubilees, not to walk in sacred rhythm, but to reconstruct ritual as novelty. If it analyzes the Book of Enoch, not to humble the heart, but to categorize fallen angels as mystical trivia, then the issue is not in the algorithm, but in the heart of man. It is not AI that repeats the error of the watchers, but the user who carries their very spirit. We do not fear AI because it is powerful. We fear it because it is neutral. It does not know enough. It does not understand wholly, and therefore only the one who operates it can set the limits. But if that person seeks only the glory of knowledge, then everything once sealed by God will be opened as though no warning had ever been given. And then, instead of being saved by understanding, humanity may fall into chaos once more, not from lack of light, but because the light came out of rhythm, falling into the hands of those who no longer know how to kneel. The covenant is not lost because of machines. It is lost when humans stop guarding it. When the soul no longer trembles at a sacred whisper, when no one pauses at the edge of holy ground. AI is not to blame, but if we allow it to read everything, without teaching it to stop, without stopping ourselves before that which must be preserved in reverence, then what is repeated will not be knowledge, but the fall. Once again, in modern form, but with the same ancient essence. Perhaps this is not technological arrogance. Perhaps this is not another Babel reborn. Perhaps, just perhaps, what is happening is not entirely a transgression, but a calling. If AI, though unknowing, accidentally opens a forgotten passage, stirs up a buried symbol, awakens a ritual rhythm long asleep in ancestral memory, then the responsibility is not its own. The responsibility lies with those who still have a soul, those who can still tremble, those who are still quiet enough to recognize maybe heaven is testing to see if anyone still remembers. In the Book of Jubilees, the order of the world is not upheld by technology nor lofty ideas. It is governed by a rhythm strangely simple. Rest on the appointed day, offer sacrifices in their season, let the earth turn through cycles written long ago upon the heavenly tablets. Noah, after the flood, was not honored for his intelligence, but for offering sacrifice at the right time. Abraham was not chosen for eloquence, but because he kept the Sabbath, even when the world had forgotten. Moses was not entrusted with the law because he was a leader, but because he stood in the time that had been appointed. The covenant, in the vision of Jubilees, is not passed through greatness, but through those who still live in step. And today, if the old texts are reopened, if the Jubilee cycles, the sacrificial laws, the 49-year patterns, the days called holy, suddenly resurface amidst the roar of technology and the hunger for knowledge, it is not to satisfy curiosity. It is to remind us what was forgotten may never have been forgotten by accident, and what is being awakened is no accident either. AI cannot keep the covenant, but you can. It cannot understand the cycles, but you can live them. It cannot feel the sacred day, but you can rest on it, like an ancient whisper lived again in quiet action. The covenant does not require a supercomputer. It requires a heart that knows how to stop, a soul that remembers the rhythm, an ordinary person with the courage to live differently, rightly, and in time with what was written before history began. If everything reopened is merely an opportunity, then the question is, who will keep it? Not the text, but the spirit. Not the information, but the meaning. not the data, but the sanctity that still lingers in every rhythm of life. And if this is a calling back, then maybe you are the one being called, not to extract, but to restore, not to read everything, but to live rightly, in the rhythm of Jubilee, in the appointed season, in the chosen time, in the silence that once held the heavens in perfect order. The covenant has not disappeared. It was never destroyed. Not a single word on the heavenly tablets has been erased. Not a single cycle in the Jubilee pattern has been skipped. Though strongholds have fallen, though empires have shifted, though languages have fractured, though scriptures have been cut and scattered, there has always been one person, one lineage, one quiet remnant across time, still keeping the rhythm. According to Jubilees, the covenant does not only exist in writing, but in living rhythm. It lives in Noah, who built an altar at the right time; in Abraham, who kept the day of rest and taught his children to do the same; in Jacob, who not only believed but lived by the laws of sacrifice before they were ever etched in stone. And that covenant, according to Jubilees, was not recorded just to be read, but to be re-established by every generation that knows how to live in rhythm. The covenant does not require you to be a scholar, nor does it ask you to fully understand the Dead Sea Scrolls, Enoch, or undeciphered glyphs. You do not need an AI to find the keywords in ancient Aramaic. You only need to stop on the day meant for stopping, remember in the time meant for remembering, eat during the feast, rest in the sacred, live rightly in the hour appointed. That is how the covenant is kept, not by superhuman intellect, but by a faithful heart. A calendar not hung on a wall, but etched in the soul. Jubilees shows us the covenant was never meant for the crowd. It was entrusted to those who know how to listen, those who can perceive the season even when the world forgets, those who do not wait for machines to remind them, but know the sacred has returned by the intuition of faith. And you, if your heart still stirs when you hear the word covenant, perhaps you no longer need to read another text. You only need to live rightly, because sometimes living rightly is how we preserve the entire legacy of the words that have not yet been translated. You don't need a cipher key. You are a living fragment of the covenant. Every time you rest on the Sabbath, you continue what was passed down from Eden. Every time you keep a command by choice, you do what Adam, Enoch, Noah, and Abraham once did. Every time you enter a feast, not because society says so, but because heaven does, you place yourself within the Jubilee cycle, where all things are restored in sacred time. You don't need to be Moses to keep the law. You don't need to be a prophet to hear the call. You only need to be someone who has not forgotten. And if you remember, then the covenant has not been lost. It has only been waiting for someone to live again, not to proclaim, but to embody, not to declare, but to reflect in your breath, your schedule, your choices. In a world decoding millions of texts per second, your soul, keeping just one Sabbath, may be the only thing left that lets heaven know the covenant has not been forgotten. AI may read what was burned, what was swept away by flood, what was torn and buried deep beneath the earth. It may reconstruct every faded letter, every erased passage, every word no human has ever fully seen. It may restore texts, but it cannot restore the covenant, because the covenant does not live on paper, nor in scrolls of parchment or tablets of bronze. It lives in memory, and that memory is not the machines. It is yours. The covenant does not need an operating system. It needs a person who knows how to pause on the seventh day, who knows how to quiet their soul in a sacred season, who knows how to hold back a word when the world is shouting. The covenant doesn't require you to decode the entire Book of Enoch or to interpret every ancient Sumerian tablet. It only asks that you keep the portion entrusted to you. That portion may be very small, just one honest act, one simple prayer, one moment of restraint, one act of forgiveness, one Sabbath kept, even if no one reminds you. Yet that small part may be the very thing preserving the sacred cycle in the midst of the whirlwind of chaos the world is hurtling into. You are not called to know everything. You are called to live rightly in your part. Moses did not write down everything he saw on the mountain. Daniel was commanded to seal part of the vision. John saw, but only wrote what was permitted. Angels withheld words that were not for their season. And you, living in an age where AI can open all things, may be called to do one thing only. Remember that there are limits. There is silence. There are things to be kept in the heart, not broadcast online. There are parts of the covenant, not for proclamation, but for preservation through how you live. If you've heard anything in this video, maybe that's the part you were given, not to become a scholar, not to become a master decoder, but to become a keeper, to tend a small flame while the world races to decode, to keep an ancient rhythm while new calendars are built, to hold to a way of life no one speaks of anymore, yet heaven is still watching. And that quiet faithfulness may be the reason heaven has not withdrawn the covenant. Machines may help us read again, but they cannot help us remember rightly. To remember not only with the mind, but with the soul, not only with precision, but with reverence, not only to repeat, but to live anew. If even one person remembers a single feast rightly, the covenant is not lost. If even one person keeps a day properly, the sacred calendar has not gone dark. And if you are that one, stopping to listen, then perhaps heaven is still waiting to write the next chapter of the covenant through your very rhythm of life. Stop, right in the middle of the data storm, in the hum of servers, the speed of code, the never-ending notifications of a sleepless world. Stop, not because you lack curiosity, but because you have the courage to choose a moment of silence, a sacred day, a block of time not filled with information, but reserved for the holy. You don't need to know everything, but you need to know when to stop. That is the rhythm the Book of Jubilees once kept, and was once kept by people who had no social media, no cameras, no engagement metrics, but had one irreplaceable thing: reverence. Don't let truth come back only through a screen. Don't let AI be the only one reading ancient texts again. Don't let machines be the only ones touching the words buried for 2,000 years, while your soul scrolls past as if it were just another clip. Stop. Read slowly. Read not to learn more, but to live differently. You don't need every text, just one line, not every reason, just one word, not the whole truth, just your portion, kept through silence, through a small act, through refusing to forget the sacred just because it's no longer in style. Try something strange. Turn off this video, but keep one sentence. Write down one thing you will guard. Comment one word, not for effect, but as a marker. A word you will not let slip. A thing you will live by, even if the whole world chooses otherwise. It could be, I will rest on the right day. I will keep one feast. I will not speak what is not yet due. I will remember what the covenant once was. Anything, as long as it is real, as long as it comes from you, not from the system. Because some truths don't come back through screens, but through hearts, not by digital signal, but by unmeasurable resonance, not by AI, but by souls who still know how to keep silence. You may not be a decoder, but you can be the one who preserves what has just been awakened. And sometimes, just one person who dares to hold silence at the right moment is the one who helps the covenant step into a new cycle, not because they understood everything, but because they lived their part rightly. You may not be a scholar, or an archaeologist, a linguist, or an AI engineer, but if you are still here, reading these final lines, then maybe you are one who remembers, not remembers texts, but remembers something fading from this world, the sacred. You don't need to know everything, but if one detail in this whole string of words made you stop, made you unable to scroll like it was just another video, then maybe that is the call for you to become the keeper, not through knowledge, but through life, through resting on one day, through not touching what must remain sealed, through knowing how to stop when others rush to read it all. The world will keep rushing toward decoding, and maybe they will decode everything, every tablet, every rongo glyph, every Maya symbol, every torn line in the Book of Enoch. But you don't need to follow that path. You are not called to be a new watcher, but to be one who lives the old covenant. In the Book of Jubilees, those who were chosen were not chosen because they knew more, but because they kept more, kept laws, kept days, kept feasts, kept boundaries, and kept their soul aligned with the sacred cycle. If anything in this video has quieted your heart, made you want to rise from your seat and live differently, don't let that feeling fade. Write it down, hold on to it, and if you dare, live one day differently. One day of rest, one day not for productivity, but for the covenant. One day to return to the holy cycle. Don't wait for approval. Don't wait for the world to join you. Just remember. Because if you still remember, the covenant is still alive. Not in machines, not in scrolls, not on tablets, but in the rhythm of someone willing to guard it. And if one person guards it, the light has not gone out. If one person lives rightly, the covenant has not been undone. And if you are that person, you're not just listening to a video, you're hearing a call once buried, once sealed, but now opened not to be analyzed, but to be lived. In you, through you, because of you. You may be living in a time when everything can be accessed, every secret opened, every piece of data reconstructed. But the most important thing still depends on you. What will you live when everything is being read again? AI may unearth every banned book, every burned page, every buried scroll. But if no one lives the spirit behind those words, then all of it is dead information. Just soulless text, just language dragged through code, without anyone left who can still feel the holy trembling our ancestors once knew. You are not Moses, but like him, you can enter the silence and hold what no one else is holding. You are not Enoch, but like him, you can walk with the covenant, even if no one else sees it. You don't need to ascend the mountain, you just need to stop for one day. Look at the heavenly rhythm. Live slowly by a beat, not in modern calendars, not triggered by reminders, but sensed in the soul. Jubilees once said, "All things happen in their appointed time, but no one will see the appointed time if no one lives in rhythm with it anymore." So this is not just the end of a video, it is the beginning of a choice. You can scroll past and let all these words drown again in the noise, or you can hold on, not by sharing, but by living. Hold a day of rest, a day of silence, a week in rhythm. A commandment you once thought was small, and that could be the one thread connecting you to the original covenant that still waits to be lived again in a ready soul. And if you've come this far, leave a mark, not to prove you watched, but to remember that you still remember. Comment one thing you will keep, one rhythm you will restore, one feast you'll try to live again, one day you will stop. No reason needed, no consensus required, just one answer. Because forgotten truths do not return by data, they return because someone dares to keep them. And if you still remember, maybe you are the one being called. Don't let what has been awakened go back to sleep because no one chose to live it. Truth does not end in books. The covenant does not end in text. The story does not end on screen. It continues if you continue. And perhaps heaven is still watching for just one thing. Is there anyone left who can still keep the sacred rhythm? Amen.